Welcome, everyone. It's so good to be together today. I'm so glad that you're able to join us here in this event jointly sponsored by the BTS Center and the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. My name is Allison Cornish. My pronouns are she and her. I am the Chaplaincy Initiative Coordinator at the BTS Center, and I live in Western Massachusetts on the land of the Nipmuc peoples. I am so delighted that we are going to have a chance to hear from Sarah and Joshua and Michael. And before we get started with all of that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Nicole to bring greetings on behalf of the BTS Center.
Yes, thank you, Allison, and hello to each and every one of you. It is a joy to bring you greetings on behalf of the BTS Center's leadership. The BTS Center is the organizational successor to Bangor Theological Seminary, focused on spiritual leadership for a climate changed world. Our programs and research initiatives engage with pastors, spiritual directors, preachers, lay leaders, and chaplains. We are proud to host vocational discernment and leadership formation programs in the form of book studies, learning communities, retreats, and public conversations like this one. Cooperation and collaboration is a central value and posture for the BTS Center, and we are so grateful for all of our partner organizations in this work, including and especially today, the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. Michael.
Well, thank you all so much for welcoming me. My name is Michael Skaggs. I'm Director of Chaplaincy Innovation Lab Programs, and our partnership with BTS Center goes back many years. I mean, really, in fact, the very beginning of the lab, and so we're grateful not only for that long history, but for the work that we are doing together today. And I especially am appreciative of the work the BTS Center is doing in this regard because so much of what the lab does is focused on really the everyday kind of nitty-gritty work of chaplains, interventions in healthcare or curricula in theological schools. And so BTS is really kind of pushing the line of what we think about as spiritual care, spirituality, and what our responsibility is to each other in that regard. And so I'm very pleased that the center has been such a good partner in this work, and I'm very happy that it has continued for so long. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Michael. I just want to offer a few words about the BTS Center's work on chaplaincy and the environment, or chaplaincy and climate. Our particular interest is in chaplains who have already are employing skills that are so needed in this world. That is, assisting individuals and communities in accepting and making difficult choices and adapting to change. The chaplains and spiritual caregivers that understand trauma and offer rituals and practices of loss and grief and healing and meaning making and tending to loss and grief and brokenness and cultivating and maintaining hope and resilience and so much more. Those of you who are offering spiritual care in so many different kinds of settings know that you have this in your toolkit. And what I'm saying is that you are needed in this climate change world to bring your skills, your knowledge, your passions, and your very good experience into this realm. So let's find out who it is that is here. If you want to open your chat so we can have a chance to just communicate with one another a little bit here, why don't we start by saying what hello means to you in any language you like? What is hello to you in any language that you choose? Just drop it in the chat. Welcoming in a smile and hola, beautiful. Opening a channel. Hello, let's welcome each other. An invitation. Yeah, a couple of invitations there. Unconditional regard for the other. Yes. Yeah. Kindness. These are beautiful, beautiful. Just opening. I love it. And let's find out what kind of geographical reach we have today. Where are you zooming in from? Where in the world are you zooming in from? Presence, North Carolina, we have Seattle, New Haven, Connecticut, Eugene, Oregon, Salem, North Carolina, Maine, Washington. Oh my goodness, they're going by so quickly. Central New York that I can't read them all. But thank you for bringing all of these different places and their presences into this space. And finally, what word or a few words describe the world outside where you are today? What word or a few words describe the world outside where you are today? Snowy, atmospheric river, cold and icy. Yeah, it was one here this morning in Massachusetts. Dazzling, sunny, red-tailed hawk, sunny and cold, tense. Yes, you're in Warsaw. Thank you, Joseph, for that. Sun and cold. Mm, love it. Thank you so much. I am so delighted that Sarah Jacquette Ray and Joshua Moses agreed to be with us today in this space and in this time, because together and separately, they have written and interviewed and researched and brought to light so many topics that are critical to our understanding of chaplaincy and spiritual care in a climate change world, including grief and anxiety and friendship and relationship, and the ways in which we are broken and the ways in which we are mending one another in presence. So with that, I'm going to ask Michael to do a little bit of introduction, and then we're going to turn it over to Joshua and Sarah.
And I should note, these are brief bios. Both of our guests are extremely accomplished and have contributed to their communities in many, many ways beyond what we will discuss here this morning. But Joshua Moses is Spielman Professor in the Social Sciences, Associate Professor of Anthropology and Environmental Studies, and Chair of Environmental Studies at Haverford College in Pennsylvania. His community-driven research prioritizes partnerships that leverage the resources of higher education to address complex socio-environmental challenges. Excuse me. And Sarah Jacquette Ray is professor and chair of environmental studies at Cal Poly Humboldt. She explores the emotional dimensions of climate and environmental justice, focusing on how feelings like anxiety, despair, and hope shape activism, especially among youth. She is the host of the podcast Climate Magic and author of a field guide to climate anxiety, How to Keep Your Cool on a Warming Planet. And so we are so happy to welcome both of you here today. The chat window is open, and so by all means, please utilize that, especially for putting questions in there. But for now, we will turn things over to Joshua and Sarah.
Thanks so much, Michael. Thanks so much, BTS, and thanks for everybody for coming and for this invitation. I am very honored to be here and to share a few minutes of my thoughts of what's sort of animating me around this question of rebuilding community as medicine for the climate crisis. Josh and I have spent some significant time agonizing over our different styles and thinking about how to offer the most important pith of what we want to do today, given the short time. And also that I love that Josh asked me at the end of our planning session, what do you really want to make sure folks come away with? So I hope both of us achieve at least that. And if nothing else, it's just nice to share some space with you all and do exactly in practice what we're hoping to argue for in content in our session today. So I'm going to begin with some slides where we have some slides to organize our thoughts to keep us feeling a little bit more on target here. Let's see here. Does this work? Is that working?
Yeah, it's working, I think.
Is that looking good? Yeah.
Yep, there it is. Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is the topic that Joshua and I have been chewing over for some time. And I want to just jump right into my few minutes of what I will talk. Joshua will follow up with some of his thinking about how to apply what it is that I'm offering here in an argument form, and really pondering some questions, ending with some questions for him. And then he and I will have a little bit of a conversation before we can open up and to have some Q&A from all of you. Okay, so the central claim I want to offer you all today is something that ever since I have had this sort of watershed moment epiphany, layered moments of epiphany around this insight, it has sort of changed and inflected everything I'm doing all the time. And so it's one of those kinds of when you're walking in the mist, at some point you realize you're really wet, but it's taking a long time to get there kind of a thing. I'm still chewing on this. I'm still trying to apply this in my life. I'm still thinking about this. It's like a new set of goggles through which I'm trying to experience my life. But this central claim offered by many wisdom traditions and all kinds of places, it's not unfamiliar to you all, I'm sure, is that ruptured relationships are the cause and the symptom of the polycrisis. And I mean this as a cause and symptom, sort of like a circular feedback loop that's happening, right? That Kyle Powis White has a beautiful article in which he talks about the origin of the climate crisis is not the Industrial Revolution, but it's really the ruptured relationships that happened at the onset of colonization. And so that's sort of at the root cause thing. And also it is a symptom in the sense that the polycrisis pushes us more towards more isolation, individualism, and more rupturing of relationships, which we see in the case of something, for like example, as I'm trying to teach in my classes, the relationship between AI and us and democracy and all these things. So when I say the polycrisis, I kind of mean all the problems and how they're interconnected is in a really simple way of putting it. And so therefore, the medicine for the polycrisis is this repair of relationship, connection, resisting individualism and isolation. And what I would hope to get across, I want to make sure I flag this before I get lost in the weeds, is that oftentimes we think about the need for connection in terms of we're social creatures, or we need it for our mental health, or we need it because it will make us feel better, or it's a tool for us to be able to get up in the morning and get to work. But I also want to offer, in addition to all of those beautiful things, that I really want to put forward the idea that insisting on relationship or practicing relationship or unlearning individualism are all really political practices as well. They're not just for our own well-being. And I really want to put these two things together in what I offer today. This idea that individualism is causing us to have things like a loneliness epidemic, or that it's declining social trust, as in Robert Putnam's fantastic book from many decades ago now, Bowling Alone. This is a concept that many of you probably are familiar with. This idea that decline in social trust is actually something that is by design. And so it actually serves those in power, it serves capitalism, it serves those who would like to make sure that they can wrest control over the people, for us to not have social trust in each other, and for us to lose what Putnam called social capital, and that this has really deleterious effects on our democracy, as we're seeing, right? I don't need to go into the details of evidence as to what it's doing to our democracy. Sarah Stein Lubrano has a beautiful book that's just come out called Don't Talk About Politics, How to Change the 21st Century Mind. And I'm really drawing a lot of her work here. She's a fantastic new thinker and concepts like this, including how she argues beautifully in her book, and I just would refer you to it, that the decline in social infrastructure that would support connection is very much by design, that there are ways in which people are actively trying to separate us from each other and separate us from the more than human world, separate us from our bodies, separate us from our hearts, and that this is all leading to what she calls social atrophy. You've probably heard of the past Surgeon General Vivek Murthy's book and arguments that we're in a loneliness epidemic. That's another way of thinking about it. I spent a lot of my time as a professor thinking about the quote unquote youth mental health crisis. Some of you might be familiar with that too. So I spend most of my time thinking about what role does the polycrisis and the current political moment have to do with that? And then, of course, some of the causes of this, right? I mean, Tricia Hersey's beautiful book, Rest as Resistance, she talks about the role of grind culture in promoting us to feel really, really tired. And this leads us to having this concept that the Good Samaritan experiment I would like to bring in here, it's another great thing to look up, would say is perceived time scarcity, that because of the grind culture, because of exhaustion, because of the work we're doing, we don't really have the space and time, or at least this is how I feel oftentimes, I don't really have the space and time to do the right thing, to to practice right relationship with my neighbor or the environment or the animals in my backyard, or even to put my laundry on a line instead of putting it in the dryer, because that's an efficiency thing. So this perception of my own time scarcity that is very much promoted by hustle culture and grind culture that we live in leads us to some of these forms of social decline and relationship decline. And I would say that one of the things I love about this particular book, Clayton Page Alden has written a beautiful book called The Weight of Nature, is he even talks about how we mostly think about how climate change is going to hurt the planet. And that a hotter planet would hurt us. And this is oftentimes the way people talk about climate change. But his argument is actually that a warmer planet would make us hurt one another more. And so I want to kind of highlight the role of climate change in exacerbating these relationships with each other that I'm arguing we need to get more cognizant of so that we can intervene better. And so I'll finally wrap with my few minutes here of sharing this with the argument that relationships, and when I say relationships, I mean with our neighbors, soft, weak ties and strong ties and all the different types of relationships people talk about in the social psychological literature, relationships with the more than human world, relationships with ourselves, all of these things are both the means and the ends of climate justice. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes people can get convinced that they need to work on mutual aid or build more ties across lateral ties, because that's going to be the way that we're going to survive a big disaster. And I'm all for that. Absolutely. It is a means of climate justice. But I also want to point out that I think it's also the ends as well, in that isn't the reason why we want to achieve these kinds of things. And we want to have democracy. We want to have a good planet. We want to have our mental health, is so that we can live in a world where this is actually possible. So I'm inviting us to think about what it would mean to practice that right now. And so the punchline, of course, is that that relationships are the medicine for us, democracy, and the planet. And I often think, gosh, many people are often thinking about, should we have technocratic solutions to the polycrisis? Do we need to change democracy? Where should I put my energy? I don't know which leverage point of change is going to be the most important for doing the things that I want to see in the world. And I often say, well, the thing that kind of underlies all of the problems is relationships. And so I sort of think of a systems solution approach or a multi-solving approach as actually, it's a kind of complex term, but really comes down to relationships. And I just wanted to point out here that I'm not the first person to say this. I really want to uplift. Many Indigenous voices have been saying this for some time, that to solve the climate crisis, we really must repair relationships, because that's where the root is. And that, of course, when we talk about mental health among youth and many of the rest of us too, that the collectivity aspect of our action oftentimes is the actual medicine for our climate anxiety and our climate despair and emotions. And I would point out that the research here shows that it's not the action itself, or even the evidence that action achieves what we want, that alleviates anxiety, but the collectivity part that alleviates anxiety. And I really want to point out and pull those things apart, because that's super interesting research. And there's all kinds of research coming out recently that says, people are often saying, what can I do to solve the climate? It's so big, it's so difficult, and I can't touch it. And there's a lot of good research coming out about just knowing your neighbors as one of the most important climate actions that we can take, and having relationships with our neighbors. So I just sort of putting out that there are people talking about these kinds of things in different spaces. And then I wanted just point out that there's this beautiful graphic that is in an edited book we just put out in 2024, the Existential Toolkit for Climate Justice Educators. And in this graphic, you can see that our nervous system reactions to terrible news, which we're sort of in all the time right now, this sort of constant sense of inflamed from 24/7 news cycle, has our nervous systems thinking about things like fight, flight, or freeze. And I want to point out that the beautiful opportunity here, that if we are intervening and thoughtful and mindful about what our nervous systems are doing when we're living in such a difficult world, is that we can choose to lean in towards this option too, the sort of tend and befriend option of social engagement, where we can take action and honor our boundaries and not burn out. And so I would suggest that social engagement is sort of the ideal place for our nervous systems to be able to go if we do the work to train that and do the practice around that. And so now I will turn to Josh Moses, who's going to take over some slides and share some questions that this all leaves us with. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to BTS for hosting this. I'm really grateful to be here with you. Sarah and her work has been a really important to me since I came across her book years back, and so I'm always happy to engage with you, Sarah. And I think we've arrived at more or less the same place, unsurprisingly. I'm just going to share with you some thoughts. This is these are all things I've been thinking about for a while, and really still struggle sometimes for them to cohere. So these are a set of thoughts and prompts that we can perhaps talk about as a group today. I keep coming back to friendship as one of the building blocks for society, for living life in a mortal body on Earth, and I'm not alone, right? So other folks long before me have said more or less the same. This is from one of the suttas, the Pali Suttas. No, Ananda, the Buddha told him, having good friends isn't half of the holy life. Having good friends is the whole of the holy life. And it seems to me that friendship is very much under assault. And as Sarah points out, we have a society that creates loneliness by design. It's a kind of organized loneliness, to paraphrase political philosopher Hannah Arendt. Do I have control of these slides? I guess I don't, do I? Oh, yeah, there we go. Aristotle famously wrote in the Nicomachean Ethics at length about different kinds of friendship. He says, "For without friends, no one would choose to live, though he," or I added the they, had all other goods. So without friends, no one would choose to live. And of course, Aristotle echoes throughout the Christian tradition, particularly with St. Thomas Aquinas, and more recently, the recently deceased Alistair MacIntyre. So friendship is an essential building block of society, and is, I think many of us feel, is under assault by AI, social media, how to make a living, people moving constantly across the country and across the world, and the way in which anxiety operates on our relationships. And I think many of us experience in our workplaces the ways in which relationships kind of blow up in ways they might not have in the past. Things that might have been at a 3 are now at a 9, like all the time. And there's kind of fraying of connections. So the question is, where does one find the medicine? And how do we find this medicine together? And how do we not only find it, but as Sarah's pointing to, actually use it? Because the medicine is all around us, right? It's this sort of open secret. It seems so obvious and yet so elusive, knowing your neighbors. Like, this seems like a very simple task, yet we don't do it. We have a society that's organized to keep us separate. At the same time, we have these choices that we can make in our daily lives. So events like this are places where one at least gets to ask, in the company of others, the questions of what it is to live a good human life together with other humans and non-humans. And that in itself, I think, exemplifies some of the medicine that we need. I'll just share, like, a few years back, or last year, I guess it was, Sarah came to visit, and this is just an example, without going into detail, of a workplace situation that I was struggling with. And I remember Sarah saying something like, this was during a particularly tense time on college campuses, and I was struggling with a colleague, and Sarah said, there's a time for repair and a time for stepping away. And that stuck with me, and has been very helpful for the past year. It's just like one instance of a kind of friendship that we can enact anywhere, and we don't always know what the impacts are. Another question I'm sitting with is, how does one find presence when one is feeling anything but present? A lot of the spiritual literature we read says, we need to be more present. It's great, we do need to be more present, but many of us don't feel present at all, and don't have the bridge to get from non-presence to presence. So there's sometimes a missing piece. Another thing that I think echoes with what Sarah was saying is the political philosopher. Again, I've been reading a lot of Hannah Arendt, who wrote this famous tome, The Origins of Totalitarianism, the first book post-war, World War II, that was really dealing with totalitarianism. One of her key points is the need to build a political society where people are not means to ends. So in other words, how do we come to see that the good of ourselves, of individuals, are inextricably tied up with common goods, that we can't we can't have one without the other, and that the aim of human life is not simply to maximize one's own gains, as much of the messaging we get in our society is. I suspect most of us have had moments where we feel something different, where we feel that we're not just about maximizing our own gains. We are part of a common good, but we live in a society again that tells us something different. Let's go to the next slide, and then I'll wrap up so we have plenty of time for questions. So another medicine that many of us turn to is the non-human world, and this is a quote by the great Howard Thurman, sometimes known as pastor of the civil rights movement, who spent time at Haverford College with the Quaker mystic Rufus Jones, and this is one of his more famous quotes about when he was 7 years old and he used to talk to an oak tree. Eventually, I discovered that the oak tree and I had a unique relationship. I could reach down in the quiet places of my spirit, take out my bruises and my joys, unfold them, and talk about them. I could talk aloud to the oak tree and know that I was understood. It too was part of my reality, like the woods, the night, and the pounding surf, my earliest companions giving me space. So he's writing about, probably this is in 1907, and a kind of, one could call it, I suppose, a mystical experience with the non-human world, if you want to use that language. But it endured throughout his life. He writes this in his memoirs, which he wrote sometime around his midlife. So the non-human world is one place to go when humans become overwhelming and difficult, and to gain sustenance from other beings that are around us all of the time. But in the end, it seems to me, next slide, please. Is there a next one? Yeah. It seems to me the only way to be really human and to learn is to engage our ideas and our beliefs in the company of others. And this is often painful. It's always humbling. And if you know of any other ways to become human, I would love to hear them. This is an old friend of mine, and I was thinking about him today while preparing and came across this picture. So I'll leave us with these questions, I should say. How are friendships changing, and how do we become attuned to this, and how do we change with them? And again, Hannah Arendt wrote, "What prepares men or humans for totalitarian domination in the non-totalitarian world is the fact that loneliness, once a borderline experience, has become an everyday experience." So to go back again to what Sarah was saying, these experiences are of course individual. We all have our own stories and we all have the details of our lives, but at the same time, they're political and they are by design in many ways. So with that, thank you all. And we can I guess Sarah and I will ask each other a couple questions,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then we can open up to y'all.
Okay. Thank you, Josh. I love that last quote. Oh, Hannah Arendt. I was going to ask you a particular question about practice. What are some concrete examples that this is all very esoteric and heady. I know my slides were, and some Hannah Arendt, right? But,
Yeah.
You and I were talking before we got on the call about what this means in real life.
Yeah.
That bridge between
Good
the thinking and the doing. And the question I want to ask you is, can you think of some examples just off the top of your head of how you're trying to practice this in your daily life?
Well, so one of the things that comes to mind is I have a 9-year-old, and so last year when she was 8, sometime around February, when it was those grim February days when it's rainy and cold and everyone's tired of winter, somehow we decided to have a chat and chocolate. So she wrote up a sign, she drew some pictures, and we put it out in front of our house and made some hot chocolate and cookies. And the neighborhood showed up. Random folks just came in, and pretty soon the house was pretty filled up. But it's just super simple. It's not the revolution, it's not transforming the planet, but it was like a simple reminder for me of like, it doesn't have to be that complicated. A little bit of hot chocolate, some cookies, and neighbors hanging out. And people were super grateful. So the feedback was really beautiful. It's good for the kid to be part of it. It's good for me, and the neighbors come out. That's just one example. I teach, so a lot of my work is with, like you and 18 to 22-year-olds and trying to be there for them in a way that feels grounded and meaningful sometimes when I don't myself feel grounded.
Yeah, thanks. I was just thinking too, I had a neighbor who had a bunch of extra daffodil bulbs and wanted to bring them by. And we don't have the same politics. I'll just, that's the thing about the neighbors. So you never know. And I've often had some spars with her over Facebook about politics. And so I've thought to myself, gosh, is it more important for me to be neighborly with this person or to, you know, teach her some of the things that I'm thinking about, right? In that kind of paternalistic mindset of trying to be righteous and win people over on the righteousness. And in what I'm preaching to the choir here, I had to check myself and think, oh, my neighborliness, my relationship with my neighbor is more important than me convincing her about my views. And so I've laid off of things on Facebook, and I've also done a huge amount of compassion work in my own mindfulness journey. And so compassion is a really important door for me, a very important practice for all of this. And I would say that when she gave me the bulbs, I was so touched that she would think of me to give her bulbs to. Of all the neighbors, send me a personal email, and she dropped off the bulbs. So this is good. This is all like good relationship with the neighbor thing. But then I don't really know. No one needs to tell me. I'll figure it out. But I don't really know when to plant bulbs. So I immediately thought of Googling it, right? Because AI can tell me right away when to plant bulbs. But one of the things that my students are practicing right now in teaching me is all of these techniques they're researching about how to divest from AI in order to not let AI replace their relationships, their really weak ties with their crazy neighbors or whatever they are. And so I refuse to ask the internet when to plant bulbs. I am waiting around to meet Betty, and then I'm going to ask Betty. This is my little example of like, it's the easy thing to do, to just go and check the thing. And so one of my practices I wanted to share, really tiny little like concrete practices, is living in a world where I'm not relying on AI for my answers and actual human beings, because that's how we used to do it. We used to even do that on Twitter, right? We say to human beings, what is everyone's best advice for how to teach a class on blah, blah, blah. And then human beings would write on Twitter what they thought that we should do. We get this great crowdsourcing information. And even in that context, I'd say that that's more relational than what AI will offer me up on my bulbs right now. So there's some strategies around divesting in AI and how AI is ruining our relationships and designing our relationships away from each other. But that's just one example. One can think of many, many others, including your neighborhood one, which is so real. So in real life, as they say.
Well, and the AI question is a huge one. I think you and I talked about this before. I was at a meeting not long ago, and a bunch of folks were talking about how they use AI to find information. I was like, how about asking our colleagues? And they all looked at me somewhat jokingly, but somewhat serious. They're like, no, that's so old fashioned. And I was sort of shocked at how quickly this is happening.
I think it's really just raising the awareness about what the political costs are to these undermined relationships helps my students anyway, who otherwise for whom the default setting are these designed ways out of relationship. Exactly. I often think of students, for the most part, coming into classrooms not having some political awareness about the conditions of their lives and why they're that way and what they might want to do to change that. They often think that the problems they might want to solve are just really far away and abstract, and they have to wait till they have a lot of money or power to fix them. And so what I try to often do is bring it really down to basics. How are you practicing in your daily life the divestment from these systems that would isolate us? And there also has to be buy-in that relationship repair is the medicine. And I'm hoping that by the end of our session today, we'll also have buy-in in this group about that too.
Time to ask you a question?
Yeah.
All right. So when you're feeling sort of ungrounded or unmoored or whatever language you use, is there someone you turn to when you need help?
That's such a great question. My first practice there is not really a person, so I sort of undermines the relationship point, but I'll get there. I think is a practice that I learned from Adrienne Maree Brown, and it's also a practice that comes out of Buddhist practice and all many traditions around attention. And so oftentimes the thing that unmoors me, that's getting my attention, if you think about nervous systems and how our attention often goes to the flashy stuff that's right in front of us, I really try to remind myself to put my attention on the things that I want to grow and not just the flashy things that are grabbing my attention right in front of me. And that really is a very grounding practice for me. I think of my attention as like fertilizer and water and good soil in a garden. And I want to have the things I don't like that are scaring me and catching my attention and they're monsters in the room. I want them to wither away. And I want the beautiful things that I want to nurture to grow. And so I think of my attention as the only lifeline I have when I'm in a really bad place for that. And that's a right away practice, like an emergency practice. But the person I turn to is my mom. So, yeah, I've got a mom. I've got one of those moms, you know, who I have one of those moms that no matter what is going on, she sets me straight and cheers me up and sees the positive and pumps me up. So yeah, I have that person in my life as my mom, as a relationship. How about you, Joshua?
I'm similar to you. I have some practices that are that help ground me that are outside of relationships with humans. Sometimes just taking a walk in the woods, and there's particular trees I spend a bit of time with, and more over the past 10 years or so. I suppose my mom would be up there as well. My mom is 88 now, I think, and yeah, and she has been organizing, as she says, all the folks with walkers and canes in the home she lives in, and she's been out in front. Yeah, really, really fighting for people and the planet, and even with multiple ailments and you know, all kinds of things. So she's up there. I would say my spouse Amber's up there too. She's a grounding force. And then a couple of close older friends that I'll be on the phone to, and I'm trying to sort things out or feel more on the edge. But the non-human world is very much part of how I find myself, like and finding quiet, more and more quiet feels very essential as a way of maintaining and building relationships, not as like avoiding them, but as like a need in order to engage with other people.
I want to end on that thread and just point out that sometimes people read Sarah Stein Lubrano's work, or even when I listen to my own self spouting off about community and collectivity and critiquing individualism, that somehow that the implication is that we're not supposed to be alone. And I would distinguish between loneliness and being alone. And I would also distinguish between that part of those relationships, what's included in there is with ourselves. And I want to really underscore what you're describing, Joshua, that a relationship with ourself is an essential part of what we're arguing for here. And certainly none of the other ones can really operate the way we're idealizing here if that sort of foundational one isn't really strong. So one would, the desire to be alone is not inconsistent with the idea that the community and collective and relationships are the medicine for our time. So
yeah, well put. Thank you. So are we opening up to questions?
I think it's time.
Yeah, I think we hit it.
We hit it. We're at the 40
yeah.
after the hour.
Yeah. All right, well done.
Amazing. So rich. Thank you, Joshua, and thank you, Sarah. And yeah, there are some things popping up in the chat. We encourage all of you to drop things in the chat that we'll address as much as we can. A couple of things that have come up in the conversation. I'll start out with one, and it looks like Michael has one too. I'm really curious. I think you both use the language of by design, separation by design, or isolation by design. And I wonder, I know that we're really focused on the good medicine, but just a little bit more perhaps analysis of the motivations behind that design would be really helpful to just fill out that story a little bit more.
It's a good
You
one.
want to start, Joshua?
Sure, I can start and then you can jump in. For me, what that means is we live in a world, at least in the United States, that is built on extracting labor, extracting resources, and extracting attention from humans in a way that fragments us. There's nothing natural about this in the sense this is not how
Mm.
humans have lived for the past 200,000 years. And by design, I mean there are certain people who are benefiting from this, and there are certain people who are not. And the design is those who are benefiting from it want our attention, and they want our money, and they want us to work more for less. If that sounds like a conspiracy theory, well, in this case, I don't think we need to look too far to look at the increase in inequality from the like late 60s and 70s to now, and the ways in which that um, maps onto certain kinds of technologies that are bent on fragmenting our attention and relationships. In brief.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you went first because mine is sort of like examples of what Joshua just said. And I would say that the development of the highway system and the promotion of the single automobile, the promotion of single family homes. I'm talking about literal planning design, like physical infrastructure of our lives, promotes that kind of individualization. And for example, I was just watching Sunday Night Football, and I saw an advertisement for AI to help new homeowners figure out how to fix their linoleum floor or whatever. And I thought to myself, wow, I not to harp on about AI, but the ways in which layer by layer by layer social atrophy is being chipped at by the forces that be who gain a lot of money from us needing capitalism more than we need each other. And I think the kind of collectivist versus individualistic society kind of thing is part of this, is sort of an underplaying thing that the kind of bootstraps, Horatio Alger's myth of American dream, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. That was how I was absolutely raised, sort of growing up in that water. And so there's a cultural mythos around individualism that I think we're talking about by design. There's some beautiful aspects to that too. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater here, but there's a real sense of I separate the definition of freedom, the definition of privilege is me not being obligated to anything else, me not having any responsibility to anything else. My parents, by their privilege, very much said to me, your job is to leave the family and go off to college and go off and make it for yourself. That is like the goal they had for privilege for their children. And after living in communities where that is not cool, more collectivist communities, I have become to see the water I was swimming in growing up a little bit more critically. And I say that the more there's also research about how inequality perpetuates social distrust. And I would say that inequality is definitely bad. You can certainly find inequality by design for all the reasons that Joshua just said too, but that there's that for people whom the state and existing systems and institutions have not served them, they are likely to be, and there's evidence that suggests that they are a little bit more collectivist too. So there's a sense of like, maybe there is an unlearning that might happen around individualism. Yeah, and so there's infrastructure, there's democracy being taken over. The Hannah Arendt argument around loneliness perpetuates the conditions for fascism and authoritarianism. All kinds of incentives coming at us in all different directions. And I wouldn't say COVID helped us, right? I just want to kind of put that out there that we kind of accelerated this a lot during
That's
COVID,
right.
I think.
That's a good point to remember.
Oh, thank you so much for just filling that out. You went where I thought you were going to go, and I'm sorry if I pushed you to say things that perhaps you were holding back on, but thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pass it to Michael.
Thank you very much, Allison, and thank you both for this just enormously stimulating conversation. I wanted to make one comment and then ask one of these questions that's come in. And the comment is, I really loved two sort of sources that you mentioned. Joshua, you mentioned Hannah Arendt, and then Sarah, you also mentioned indigenous wisdom, and it reminded me that of course, the specifics of this moment are unique to us. The wisdom that we can draw on is not. And so I
Yeah.
think we often find ourselves sort of casting about for what new solution can we come up with. We must use our genius today to solve these problems, when really the pieces of an answer we already have right in front of us. And so thank you for calling attention to that. Um, there's Erica has a really good question. Um, and it touches on relationality and sort of scale, which is how organized or systemic do you think this needs to be? Or can it simply and powerfully be individuals deciding and trying to be more relational?
Okay, Joshua, can I jump on that one?
Yeah, I was going to say, go
Okay.
ahead, Sarah.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of both and as an answer to everything, which is a little bit of a cop out. I appreciate it. But I'd say that there is a tension underlying that question as I hear it between what do I have power over and what do I not have power over? Right? Like, do I actively engage in this, or do I wait around for people in power to fix this problem over there? And that tension is something I feel deep empathy, and I feel like it's alive for me every day. And certainly for my students, it's alive in our classes every day. I would say that there's a fantastic book called The Psychology of Collective Climate Action. I would highly recommend. There's a chapter in there about the tension between what they call collective efficacy versus personal efficacy. And I'd say that what they say is if you have too much personal efficacy, you have this kind of hero savior complex of I'm solving the problem every day of my life. I'm doing just fine. And that can lead to burnout, right? So there's a sense of like, if you aren't connected in your personal efficacy to some larger system, it can make you have this sort of savior complex and lead to burnout and other things. But too much collective efficacy can make you think, oh, they've got it covered. I don't need to do anything. And so I would say that my answer to that question is both and those both things, right? The collective efficacy is the medicine. But for many people, and it's going to vary for different people, and I think it's super culturally conditioned too, we have a need, some of us have a certain amount of need for a sense of personal efficacy too. So this kind of delicate balance that we need to navigate between personal efficacy. I'm doing this in my daily life. I can ask Betty about the bulbs. And that by doing that, it's such a tiny thing, but I am actively practicing a muscle of collective consciousness that prioritizes relationship with a neighbor over righteousness or dismissal or misanthropy, or I'm just too busy, time scarcity, given to my perceptions of my time scarcity. That those are all hugely political, even if it's just about the darn bulbs, right? And so I'd say that's the thing I feel personal efficacy around. I don't feel personal efficacy around insisting on public transportation so we interact more with each other in third spaces in my community. I can't do anything really about that. So there's a little bit of both and that we need, because we can lean into the political changes that would make those conditions so as well, depending on our relative access to these conversations.
Mm-hmm. I'll jump in real quick and talk about something that's been on my mind this past year, because at Haverford, where I teach, we've been doing a year-long, and it'll probably extend into next year, theme on the impacts of extreme heat and on human health and non-human health as well. You know, we need a government, and we need structural changes. We need OSHA to have policies that protect workers. We don't have that government right now, for the most part. On the neighborhood and community level, actually, like some water and some shade and some company can save people's lives. You know, it actually doesn't take that much in that instance. And when I say company and conversation, you know, social isolation and heat-related deaths and illnesses go hand in hand. So when you see the roofer up on the roof and it's 110 degrees and we don't have laws protecting the roofer, when you see the restaurant work, a glass of water, some shade, and some rest can really go a long way. So those are fairly individual actions. You can do them on a community level, a block level, a municipal level. But we're not waiting for OSHA to pass new policies, though we need those, and we should advocate for those as well. So that's just one example that's been on my mind. And also for students, a reminder that pathways for action are key. Like, anything is an entry point. Recycling, which we know, I grew up recycling, and we know now recycling doesn't actually help all that much. It was partly propagated by the fossil fuel industry. But shaming people doesn't help, and it's an opening for conversation about what people care about and how people can take action about things that's important to them, hopefully in the company of others.
These are great. And the questions in the chat are wonderful too. I'm wondering if I can just slip in this question from Justin, and particularly since we've both been talking a little bit about students and youth. Justin says, I'm holding the loss of intergenerational spaces and wondering how folks cultivate those spaces. I'm personally thinking of like the only intergenerational space in our community right now really is the library. And even in the library, it's separated horizontally, children and youth in one area, adults in another. I'm curious about what you're seeing about cultivating relationships there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing a ton. I did listen to an amazing podcast on the need for that, and so I'm convinced by that that we do need that. And also, I'd say that young people are also figuring that out. We are seeing some practices, and this is something people can think about firing up in their own communities, around housing, where elderly people house students, and also housing communities that are sort of this Jane Jacobs style housing community where young people and elderly people are they're in a mutual relationship of caregiving and offering housing. So whether that's a college campus or other situation, housing for young people is a real crisis. So that's a sort of a multi-solving example of that. And I would say that in American culture, there's such a huge fetish of youth that at least my generation was very much raised thinking that elderly folk are out of sight, out of mind, and have nothing to offer anymore. And so unlearning that has been my journey. And I am now teaching an ancestor project in my classes where I don't ask people to do a family tree, but rather to think about what the wisdom of their elders is, however they want to define that, and what they think of themselves as an elder at some point, what they would like to think about for their descendants, biological or otherwise. So there's sort of a larger temporal arc thing that is being called for here, and lots of cultures, not the one I was raised in, have that already. And again, to Michael's point, this is stuff that's been done, and there are reasons for doing this. And so I think in the climate crisis moment, people who may have had the privilege to cut a lot of these ties to relationships with the more than human world, relationships with our neighbors, relationships with our families, also relates to our relationships with the sort of this intergenerational connection that is required. Joshua, do you have thoughts about that? More examples of how that's happening, intergenerational?
I don't have a sense on the national level, but just from personal experience, I think it really depends where one lives. I think this is really community by community, municipality by municipality, but investigating some of these older institutions that might need reinvigoration rather than creating a new one. These may be houses of worship. I joined a choir recently that happens to be part of a Presbyterian church, and the generational range is tremendous. We have 20-somethings to probably close to 80 and everything in between. So there may be just these organizations that at first glance you might be like, that's not my kind of organization. But maybe there's opportunities in these structures to reinvigorate them and see what's happening and bring new energy.
Oof. There's also a book recommendation in the chat called Hope Meadows. So we'll look at that too.
Cool,
My goodness, an hour flies by super, super fast. There are questions in the chat that we did not get to. And thank you, folks. They are food for thought for the future. But right now, I'm going to invite Michael to begin to wrap us up and saying our goodbyes and gratitudes.
Yes, thank you, of course, everyone who has joined us today. There's been such a vigorous conversation here in the chat. And of course, we want to focus on our guests, but to know that there is such a fruitful back and forth is always really gratifying as well. So thank you all for your time and your energy this afternoon, or at least here in the Eastern time zone. Of course, Joshua and Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your time, your energy. What folks don't see is that a lot of planning goes into these events, and so much led up to this. This is the culmination of a longer process, and so I'm so grateful that we have had your engagement and involvement so far. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for organizing and for hosting us.
Many thanks all around, Allison, Michael, Joshua, Sarah, and all of you gathered here. Let me take a moment just to share some ways to continue the journey with the BTS Center, with Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, and with Sarah and Joshua. To stay in touch with Sarah and her thinking, we invite you to check out the Climate Magic podcast. Please continue to find her thoughts in your head as you like put your AirPods in and listen to Sarah in that podcast. Also, if you want to stay in touch with Joshua, he shared with us earlier that there's going to be a poetry clinic in New York City. So if you're in range for that, I'll post a flyer for that in the chat in a moment. For the BTS Center, we would love for you to stay connected to our Climate Conscious Chaplaincy Initiative. If you go to the webpage for that initiative, you'll find recordings from all our previous events of this sort, of which there are maybe 8 to 10 now. So there's many events and recordings you can access there, as well as our newsletter sign up. Our newsletter for climate conscious chaplains is called Murmurations, and we would love to share information from our newsletter with you, so you can sign up there. Upcoming programming, we are about to launch year 4 of Conversation Circles, Being Chaplains in a Climate Changed World. This is another partnership program with the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. These are small groups that are facilitated, co-created space for vocational discernment and collegial support. Chaplains thinking about what it means to be doing their work in this particular time. We also invite you to log on for Lament with Earth. This is a 5-session seasonal worshipful gathering online. We have partnered with The Many, an amazing group of liturgists and musicians and other organizations that are focused on holding ecological grief. Our next Lament with Earth is tomorrow night, so we might see you as soon as tomorrow evening. We'll be partnering with Radical Joy for Hard Times for that gathering. And another podcast I invite you to check out, along with Sarah's, is Climate Changed. This is the BTS Center's podcast. I have been busy recording season 4 with co-host Autumn Brown, who you may know from the podcast How to Survive the End of the World. So check her out there, get to know her there. And then Autumn and I will be hosting season 4, which will be released starting in February of next year. Most recently, we have been doing a behind the scenes mini season. And so I want to call your attention to the episode that we did that features Allison's voice around claiming your call. So check us out wherever you get podcasts. And we'd love to accompany you as you're doing dishes or folding laundry or driving somewhere. We'd love to find our way into those moments with you. I'm going to stop sharing, and Michael, invite you to share anything coming up for Chaplaincy Innovation Lab.
Yes, thank you very much. I do invite everyone, please come check us out, chaplaincyinnovation.org. Lots of things going on there, but especially check out our webinars. Those happen at least once a month, if not more. Many of them are free. We have one coming up actually on Thursday that has to do with, can we even come to a consensus on how to define spiritual care right now? So it's going to be a bit of a meta conversation, but of course, everyone is invited. That one is free and open to the public. We're going to have another one later in December on spiritual care for Buddhist students in higher education. Again, we get a little bit down in the weeds, a little bit more nuts and bolts chaplaincy, but we do invite everyone to come attend as well. And then in February, we're currently scheduling an event with a very special guest. I'm very excited. Once we'll be able to announce that, that has to do with how do you juggle a call into chaplaincy as well as feeling maybe you are called to leave chaplaincy and how to deal with that. So please do join us for that and other events.
Wow, 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 and wow. So thank you all for joining us today. Look for the recording that will come in your inbox, and look for other events on our website. And we can't wait to connect with you again. And let's do a cacophonous kind of goodbye by all unmuting and saying goodbye.